I was a terrible boyfriend. Now I think my girlfriend is haunting me. I was already halfway down the stairwell when my phone vibrated in my hand. The stairwell was narrow, the walls close enough that my shoulder brushed the paint as I moved. The fluorescent light above me buzzed with a faint electrical hum, uneven, like it was struggling to stay on. The air smelled like dust and something metallic, old pipes heating and cooling behind the walls. I stopped without deciding to, one foot planted on a chipped concrete step, the other higher, my knee bent in a way that made my calf tighten. The phone vibrated again. I didn't look at it right away. I stood still, listening to my breathing echo back at me. It sounded louder than it should have, amplified by the enclosed space. Somewhere below me, a door opened and shut. A voice laughed briefly. Then the sound disappeared, swallowed by the stairwell. I unlocked the phone. Unknown contact. No message yet. Just the typing indicator. It appeared, vanished, then appeared again, like whoever was on the other end was hesitating. The light above me flickered once and steadied. A photo began to load. It sharpened slowly, pixel by pixel, until my stomach tightened. It was my apartment door, not something similar, not a stock image. It was mine, the faint scratch near the handle from when I moved in, the welcome mat I kept meaning to replace, the slight tilt of the doorframe that made it close unevenly. The angle was close, centered, taken from directly in front of it. I checked the timestamp. 10 minutes earlier. I hadn't been home. I lowered myself onto the step and stared at the screen until it dimmed. In the dark reflection, I could see my face faintly, jaw clenched, shoulders lifted, eyes fixed on something behind me instead of what was in front of me. The phone vibrated again. You should listen now. There was an attachment, a voice memo. The file name was her name. For a long time, I told myself I wasn't a bad person. That belief settled in early and stayed with me because it was convenient. It allowed me to categorize myself as misunderstood rather than harmful. I wasn't volatile. I didn't yell. I didn't break things or threaten to leave. I didn't cheat in obvious, cinematic ways that could be pointed to and condemned. There were no scenes that could be replayed for clarity. No raised voices or slammed doors. What I did was quieter, and because it was quiet, it was harder to see. I withheld affection when I felt uncomfortable. I delayed responses when conversations started to drift toward accountability. I stayed vague when clarity would have required me to explain myself. I learned, without consciously deciding to, that uncertainty keeps people attached longer than honesty does. She noticed before I did. We met through work, not directly, but through proximity, same building, different apartments. The kind of place where you recognize someone's walk before you know their name. The lobby had a security desk with a single guard who rotated shifts and always wore his badge clipped too low. The elevators took too long during peak hours, so people lingered near the coffee kiosk, checking phones, pretending not to watch one another. She carried a notebook everywhere, not a company-issued one. The cover was bent backward, the edges softened from constant use. She held it against her chest sometimes when she waited, like it was a shield or a habit she hadn't examined. When we started talking, she asked questions carefully, like she was measuring each sentence before putting it down. I liked that. It made me feel composed, grounded, like the steady one in the room. I was good at appearing attentive. I had learned how to tilt my head just enough, how to pause before responding so it looked like I was considering what she said. In the beginning, I did what people expect. I texted back quickly. I showed up when I said I would. I remembered details, how she took her coffee, what music calmed her down, which topics made her go quiet. I listened. I reassured. I mirrored her vulnerability just enough to build trust. That version of me didn't disappear suddenly. It faded slowly, in ways that were easy to explain away. I stopped responding right away. Then I stopped explaining why. I started answering questions with half answers. When she asked what I was thinking, I said nothing and meant not this. When she asked why I went quiet after work, I said I was tired. When she asked why I seemed more relaxed around other people, I said she was reading into things. When she noticed I laughed more easily with other women, co-workers, friends, strangers, I told her she was insecure. That word became useful. Insecure. It reframed her perception as a flaw instead of a response. If she felt neglected, it wasn't because I was withholding. It was because she needed too much. If she felt confused, it wasn't because I was inconsistent. It was because she overthought. She started apologizing for asking questions. I remember the first time clearly. We were sitting in my car outside her apartment, engine still running. The dashboard lights reflected faintly on the windshield. She stared straight ahead and wiped her face quickly, like she was embarrassed by it. Sorry, she said. I know I'm like this. Like what? I didn't ask. I stayed silent. She filled the space herself. She told me she'd always felt harder to love than other people. That she'd been told she was sensitive, emotional, complicated. That she tried to be easygoing, but sometimes failed. I nodded. I didn't contradict her. That was the moment I became fully responsible, even if I didn't admit it to myself. The truth was simpler than the explanations she offered. I treated other people better because they didn't expect anything from me. They didn't require consistency. They didn't ask me to examine myself. They saw me in fragments, Charm without responsibility, attentiveness without commitment. With her, I was exposed, and instead of rising to that exposure, I retreated. She noticed everything. The way my voice softened when I spoke to other women. The way I checked my phone when she talked about things that required emotional presence. The way I made plans easily with friends but hesitated when she asked about the future. She noticed, and she adapted. She stopped asking follow-up questions. She minimized her reactions before I could. She turned needs into jokes. She told herself stories that made my behavior survivable. Sometimes she said things that sounded less like questions and more like acceptance. This is probably just how you are. I know you don't mean anything by it. I think I just feel things deeper than most people. I let her believe all of it. When conflict came, I stayed calm, not because I was mature, but because calmness looks like reason. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue facts. I went quiet. Silence was my leverage. I watched her try to pull words out of me. I watched her soften her tone, apologize for being emotional, take responsibility for reactions I caused. I told myself I was avoiding conflict. I was actually avoiding accountability. By the time she started shrinking herself to fit the space I gave her, I had stopped noticing how much room I was taking up. The night she died, we hadn't spoken in 2 days. That wasn't unusual. Her last message was practical, almost cheerful. "Hey, just checking in. Hope your day went okay." I read it. I didn't respond. I told myself I'd answer later. Later never came. After that last message, the one I didn't answer, I went on with my night as if nothing had happened. I cooked dinner. I watched part of a show I wasn't really paying attention to. I checked my phone a few times, saw no follow-up message from her, and felt a brief sense of relief that I didn't have to explain myself. I told myself she probably understood. I told myself she knew how I was by now. That thought, "she knows how I am," had become a kind of permission slip. Looking back, I can see how often I relied on it. In the months leading up to her death, she started to make herself smaller in ways that were easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. She spoke more softly. She laughed more quickly, even when nothing was funny. She prefaced statements with qualifiers, like she was bracing for disagreement before it happened. I could be wrong, but this might just be me being sensitive, but I don't want to make a big deal out of this. Each time, I let her trail off. Sometimes I answered with a shrug. Sometimes I changed the subject. Sometimes I said nothing at all. Silence had become my default response because it required the least from me and took the most from her. She adjusted to that silence by filling it herself. She began explaining my behavior to me before I could. If I didn't respond to a message for hours, she told herself I was busy. If I canceled plans, she told herself I was overwhelmed. If I seemed distant, she told herself I needed space. I never corrected her. There were moments when she tried to push back, gently, as if testing the strength of her own footing. She'd say things like, "I feel like I'm always waiting for you," or "sometimes it feels like I'm more invested than you are." I stayed calm during those conversations. I sat still. I kept my voice level. I said things like, "I don't know what you want me to say," or "I can't help how you feel." I watched her deflate in real time. I told myself I was being honest. What I was really doing was refusing to participate in repair. She began to internalize everything. When she cried, she apologized. When she asked for reassurance, she framed it as a flaw. When she felt hurt, she questioned whether she was allowed to feel that way at all. There was a night she asked me directly if I loved her. The question came out quietly, almost cautiously, like she already suspected the answer might be something she'd have to manage on her own. I hesitated, not long enough to be obvious, but long enough that she noticed. Her eyes flicked away from mine, then back again. I said finally, "You know I care about you." Her face changed in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. She nodded. She smiled a little, like she was grateful for something I hadn't actually given her. "That's enough," she said. "I know you're not big on words." I let that stand. That moment stayed with me later, not because of what I said, but because of how quickly she accepted less than what she'd asked for. She didn't argue. She didn't push. She folded the question away like it was something fragile she'd broken by touching. I started treating her emotional presence like a resource I could draw from without replenishing. When I felt low, I leaned on her. When I needed validation, I accepted it without hesitation. When she needed reassurance, I hesitated, delayed, or redirected. I remember scrolling through my phone one night while she talked about something that mattered to her, something about her family, I think. I remember the glow of the screen lighting my hands, the sound of her voice drifting in and out as I half listened. She stopped talking mid-sentence. I looked up. She was watching me, her expression unreadable. "Sorry," I said, setting the phone down. "Go on." She shook her head. "It's fine. It wasn't important." She didn't finish the story. Moments like that stacked quietly. She began to believe that her thoughts were interruptions, that her feelings were inconveniences, that asking for clarity was asking for too much. I could see it happening, even then, and I still didn't intervene. Instead, I leaned further into emotional distance. I told myself I wasn't equipped for intensity. I told myself she knew that. I told myself she chose this version of me. The truth was, I let her choose it because it required nothing from me. In the weeks before her death, she seemed tired in a way that went beyond sleep. Her movement slowed. Her responses came later. She stopped initiating conversations that might lead to conflict. When I asked how she was doing, because I did ask, sometimes, she said she was okay. She said she was working on herself. She said she was trying to be better at managing her emotions. Those words should have stopped me. Instead, they reassured me. I thought, good, she's adjusting. I didn't realize she was disappearing. The last time I saw her in person, she brought her notebook with her. She didn't open it. It stayed closed on the table between us, her fingers resting on the cover like it was something grounding. At one point, she traced the edge of it absently while we talked. I remember thinking she looked nervous, or maybe resigned. It was hard to tell the difference by then. Before she left, she hugged me longer than usual. Not tightly, just longer. I stood there and let it happen. After she walked away, I didn't follow her with my eyes. I went back inside and closed the door. The next 2 days passed without contact. I didn't think much of it. Then came her message, the one I read and didn't answer. Hey, just checking in. Hope your day went okay. I told myself I'd respond later, when I had the energy to be present. I never did. The call the next morning came from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. When I answered, the voice on the other end was measured and careful. Someone from the hospital. Someone asking if I knew her. They used her full name. I remember the way my body reacted before my mind did. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I sat down without realizing I was doing it. After that, everything fractured into pieces. Paperwork, forms, signatures, a waiting room that smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. People speaking softly, like volume alone could manage the weight of what they were saying. Someone handed me a plastic bag with her belongings inside. Her phone, her wallet, her notebook. I didn't open it. I told myself I would later, when I was ready. At the time, I didn't understand that later was another word I used to avoid things I didn't want to face. In the days immediately after her death, nothing strange happened. That's something I hold on to because it reminds me how reasonable this all felt at first. There was grief, yes, but grief has a shape people recognize. It comes with casseroles, quiet voices, messages that begin with "I'm so sorry." It comes with paperwork and scheduling and the strange calm that sets in when there are tasks to complete. I filled out forms. I answered questions. I gave the same explanation repeatedly, adjusting my tone depending on who was asking. I learned which words made conversations end faster. I learned how to look appropriately devastated without inviting follow-up. At night, I lay awake replaying conversations I'd dismissed, silences I'd justified, moments when she'd paused mid-sentence, waiting for something I didn't give her. I told myself this was normal. Regret always arrives late. The first thing that unsettled me happened 10 days after the funeral. I woke up to a voicemail notification. Her name was on the screen. I sat up in bed and stared at it for a long time before touching anything. I checked the date, the time. I checked my call log to see if I'd missed something while sleeping. The voicemail was 3 seconds long. When I pressed play, there was nothing but static, faint, irregular, like fabric brushing against a microphone. No breathing, no voice, just noise. I told myself it was a system error. Phones glitch. Contacts get misassigned. I deleted it and went on with my day. A week later, it happened again. Same length, same static, same timestamp, 2:14 a.m. That was when I stopped deleting them. I didn't tell anyone. There wasn't anything to tell yet. 2 voicemails aren't a story. They're an inconvenience. The next thing was the notebook. I'd kept her belongings in the plastic bag from the hospital, tucked into the back of my closet. One evening, I came home from work and found the notebook on my desk. Closed, centered, placed neatly, like someone had taken care to align it with the edge. I stood in the doorway for a long time before touching it. I told myself I must have moved it and forgotten. Grief does that. Memory slips. I opened it. The pages were filled with her handwriting, tight lines, careful spacing. I flipped through until I found a page with a sentence circled in pen. If he ever sees this, I hope he understands that I tried. I closed the notebook and put it back in the bag. That night, I slept with the closet door shut. After that, things came faster, but still quietly. A calendar reminder appeared on my phone for a date that meant nothing to me until I checked my old messages and realized it was the day of one of our last arguments. The reminder title was blank. No text, just the date and a time. An email arrived addressed to her, forwarded to me by mistake from an automated system we'd both used months earlier. The subject line was generic. The body contained a confirmation code and her name spelled correctly, the way it always was. A package arrived at my apartment with her name printed clearly on the label. The return address was a company I'd never heard of. Inside was a single notebook, identical to the one she carried. I called the company. They told me the order had been placed online weeks after her death, paid for with a card that had since been closed. They couldn't tell me who placed it. I started documenting everything, not because I believed anything supernatural was happening, but because patterns demand attention. Dates, times, screenshots. I kept a folder on my computer labeled with the month. That was when the message came from the unknown number. No greeting, No explanation. You should listen now. Attached was a photo, my apartment door, taken from directly in front of it. Timestamp 10 minutes earlier. I wasn't home. I left the building that night without packing anything. I walked until my legs ached, replaying the voicemail notifications in my head, the circled sentence in the notebook, the package on my kitchen counter. I didn't listen to the voice memo until I was in the stairwell. Her voice was clear, calm. I don't think you're a bad person, she said. I think you were afraid to say what you felt, and I was afraid to ask for more. There was a pause. I could hear her swallow. I think you treated others better because they never asked you to be honest. Another pause. I know the truth now. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the phone. I sat on the stair until the light above me shut off completely. After that, I tried to impose order. I changed my number. I moved apartments. I updated passwords. I filed a report with the phone company. I asked the building manager for security footage from the hallway. The footage showed no one outside my door at the time the photo was taken. The manager suggested it might be a camera glitch. I nodded and thanked him. The event slowed after I moved, but they didn't stop. An old voicemail transcription updated itself one afternoon, converting static into words that weren't there before. When I checked again, it reverted to noise. A therapist I saw briefly mentioned a quote during a session that matched a sentence from her notebook word for word. When I asked where it was from, she couldn't remember. Then came the call that made it impossible to dismiss. A woman from my old workplace called to ask about her. She said she'd received an email from her address that morning, short, polite, asking for confirmation of a document. I asked her to forward it to me. The timestamp was from that day. The body of the email contained one line. I just need to know he finally understands. I didn't respond to the email right away. I read it once, then again, then printed it and set it face down on my desk like it might look different if I gave it time. The paper was warm from the printer. I pressed my palm flat against it and focused on the sensation, the slight vibration still traveling through the wood. I just need to know he finally understands. There was no signature, no greeting, no explanation of how or why the message had been sent. Just that sentence, typed plainly, without punctuation at the end. I called the woman who had forwarded it to me. She sounded confused more than alarmed. She said she'd assumed the email was legitimate, that maybe there had been a delay in delivery, or that someone else had access to the account. When I told her she had died months earlier, she went quiet. I'm sorry, she said after a moment. I didn't know. I thanked her and hung up. That was the moment something shifted for me, not into panic, but into recognition. The idea that I could still explain everything away began to feel like something I was actively maintaining, rather than something grounded in reality. It took effort now, deliberate effort. I went back through my documentation that night. The folder on my computer had grown thicker than I realized. Screenshots, call logs, photos of envelopes and labels, dates circled on printed calendars. Each item on its own could be dismissed. Together, they formed a shape. What unsettled me most wasn't the events themselves, but the specificity of them. They didn't feel random. They didn't feel like noise. They felt targeted, narrow, focused, not at my fear, at my understanding. I thought back to how carefully she used to choose her words, how much effort she put into being clear without being confrontational, how she always seemed to be explaining herself, even when no explanation was needed. If she were trying to communicate something now, it wouldn't be dramatic, it wouldn't be threatening, it would be precise. The next confirmation came quietly, through bureaucracy. I received a letter from a courthouse I had never been to. It was addressed to me, spelled correctly, with my current address printed neatly beneath my name. Inside was a single page informing me that a case associated with her name had been administratively closed. There was no case number I recognized. No explanation of what the case had been. Just a line at the bottom indicating the closure date. It was the date of our last unanswered message. I called the clerk's office the next morning. I was transferred twice before reaching someone who could help. She asked me to read the case number aloud. I did. She paused. That's strange, she said. This case was opened digitally. No in-person filing. No assigned attorney. What was it for? I asked. She hesitated. It looks like a request for record acknowledgement. I asked what that meant. It's not common, she said. Usually it's a formal recognition that information has been received. Not a complaint. Not a charge. Just confirmation. Confirmation of what? She couldn't tell me. The notes field was blank. After I hung up, I sat at my table for a long time without moving. The apartment was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside, tires hissing softly against the road. I thought about all the things I had never confirmed for her while she was alive. I had never confirmed that her feelings made sense. I had never confirmed that my silence hurt her. I had never confirmed that the problem wasn't her intensity, but my avoidance. I had let her live inside uncertainty because certainty would have required me to change. Now certainty was finding me anyway. The final moment didn't come with noise or spectacle. It came through her notebook. I finally opened it fully one night, months after her death, when the weight of not knowing felt heavier than whatever I might find inside. I sat at my desk and turned the pages slowly, careful not to rush, as if speed itself would be disrespectful. Most of it was mundane: lists, Fragments of thoughts, observations about her days, notes she'd written to herself about being calmer, more patient, less demanding. Then I reached the last page. It wasn't dated. It contained only a few lines. I keep wondering if I'm asking for something unreasonable, or if I'm just asking the wrong person. I think if he ever understands, it will be too late to matter, but maybe understanding still counts. At the bottom of the page, written later, in a different pen, was a final sentence. If there is a place where truth is clear, I'll finally know which one of us was right. I closed the notebook and rested my hands on the cover. That was the moment I stopped trying to decide whether I believed in anything beyond this life. Belief wasn't the point. The point was that the truth no longer depended on my participation. Whether through coincidence, error, or something I don't have language for, the outcome was the same. The things I withheld were no longer hidden. The explanations I let her carry alone were no longer unspoken. She didn't need me to confess. She didn't need me to apologize. She needed me to understand. And I did. I understand now how many times I chose comfort over honesty. How often I let her shrink so I wouldn't have to grow. How easily I accepted her self-blame because it spared me from accountability. I moved again after that. Not out of fear, but out of necessity. I needed a space that didn't carry the residue of unfinished conversations. I packed carefully. I labeled boxes clearly. I brought only what I needed. The notebook came with me. It stays closed now, placed on a shelf where I can see it without touching it. I don't reread the pages. I don't need to. Nothing else has happened since. No messages. No emails. No voicemails. The silence now feels intentional, not empty. At night, I lock the door, set my keys down in the same place, and stand still for a moment before turning off the light. I breathe until my chest settles. I let the quiet exist without trying to fill it. Sometimes guilt doesn't arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as clarity. And sometimes the most frightening thing isn't being watched or followed or haunted. It's knowing, with absolute certainty, that the truth no longer belongs to you.